We do not understand God's reckoning of time, but we also have been shut out from understanding the feast of the Lord, which the New Testament says are all shadow pictures of good things to come.
The Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, presented by Michael Rood.
Shalom, this is Michael Rood in Jerusalem. I am here in the Ophel Gardens Archaeological Park on the steps leading to the Temple Mount, Mount Moreh-Yah. In Hebrew, Har Moreh-Yah, the mountain where Yahweh will be our teacher. This is the most important mountain in the entire world. More blood has been shed on these few acres than on any other parcel of land on the planet. It is on the north peak of this mountain that Abraham prepared an altar of unhewn stone and bound his son Isaac to the wood of the sacrifice. On this same mountain, a male lamb of the first year, with his head entangled in a crown of thorns, was waiting as the substitute offering for Abraham's son. And it was here, on this mountaintop, that the sacrifices that were an integral part of the feast of the Lord were offered by the Levitical priesthood. When Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai, Israel was instructed to never sacrifice the Passover lamb inside the gates of their own cities, but they were to go up to the place where Yahweh would put his name, and that is where Israel would keep the rehearsal of the Passover. More than 500 years later, King David saw this very mountain by divine revelation, and he set out to take it from the Jebusites who were squatting on the land promised to the children of Abraham. David conquered the Jebusite city, which then became known as Ir-David, the city of David, ancient Jerusalem. He then purchased this mountaintop as the place where he would build the temple and institute the temple service. The temple service liturgy was developed by the prophets King David, Asaph, and Nathan. For the first time, they saw by divine revelation that the temple service was to be a shadow picture of the coming Messiah, David's descendant, who would literally be the fulfillment of the Passover sacrifice. And the fulfillment would happen right here in the city of Jerusalem. The Almighty had ordained this plan from the very beginning, and commanded his people to come up to the feast of Passover each year. If they obeyed his commandments and participated in the temple service during the feast, there would be no way for them to miss the moment when the Messiah arrived to fulfill the very rehearsals that they had been practicing for more than 1,000 years. This is the place where it was all planned, orchestrated, rehearsed, and finally took place. This is his story. Join us in the Lester Summerall television studios where this multimedia presentation was recorded. This is Bible Prophecy 101. Now, Episode 8 in the 26-part series on the prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, Mount Moreh-Yah, the mountain where Yahweh will be our teacher.
And so it is around the table that family then shares the bread and the wine, and that is the holy convocation that God set aside to be done in the family, with the father as the high priest of his home. And we see that even in the Brit Hadashah, in the New Testament, it indicates that there is only one head, and that is the Messiah. One head, and then all of us are all on the same level. But yet there is another head, and it is the head of the house. The husband is the high priest of that home, and he is directly underneath the Messiah as the head of that home. There's no pastor, there's no apostle or prophet that outranks the head of a house. The head of the house submits limited subjection to those who have ministries within the body of the believers, but it is that man who is responsible for his family and for training up his family. He is the high priest for his home, and it is in no other place that we see it as beautifully is at the beginning of Shabbat, when it's like we turn the light switch off to the world. And we say, we don't need your money, we don't need your entertainment, we don't need the world. God is our sufficiency, and he said that all we had to do is rest in him, and he would take care of these things. So now, in the day of at the sixth millennium and at the last time getting ready for the Sabbath millennium, we see there is some work to be done. There is some house cleaning to be done. And this is what we are doing now, because in the Sabbath we will see the Messiah reign, and it says there remains a rest, a Sabbath for the children of God. And it is the Messiah's millennial reign that we look forward to. That is the weekly Sabbath, but yet then we see that there are also, as it goes on, seasonal feasts. These are the feast of the Lord, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. And these are determined by the barley crop in the land of Israel to start out the month of the Aviv. And as it says in Deuteronomy, 3 times a year you will go up to the rehearsals at the place that I shall choose out of all the tribes to put my name. And so Jerusalem was a place that was chosen by God, because this is where all the rehearsals would take place, because the fulfillment of the rehearsals when the Messiah comes will be taking place at that very location. So I'd like to take you to the city of Jerusalem and to the map of Jerusalem, and this is the old city as it currently stands. And you'll see on your right-hand side, you have the Kidron Valley that goes around and joins the Hinnom Valley, or the Valley of Gehenna. Up the middle is the Tyropoeon, or the Cheesemaker Valley. It forms the Mount of Olives on the right, Mount Moreh-Yah in the middle, the Temple Mount, and Mount Zion. The highest peak of Mount Moreh-Yah to this very day is still north of the city wall of Jerusalem. And this becomes very important as I take you into the Mount Moreh-Yah, but you can see that the valleys form the Sheen, which is the first letter in Shaddai, or Almighty God, and it forms God's mark upon the land. And I want you to go with me and stand here in the Tyropoeon Valley and look over toward the Mount of Olives and look directly at the side of Mount Moreh-Yah. Here you are, standing, looking at the side of Mount Moreh-Yah. It was there, Mount Moreh-Yah, that God instructed Abraham to take his son Isaac to the mountains of Moriah and offer him as a sacrifice upon one of the mountains of Moriah, which he would show him. And so it was as Abraham approached Mount Moriah from the Negev, from the south. He brought his son with him, and the servants were bringing along with him the wood for the sacrifice and all that was necessary for the sacrifice. And as the servants of Abraham and Isaac, all approached from the south, when they got to the lower peak of Mount Moreh-Yah, indicated by this blue line, that is where Abraham told his servants to wait here. Do what I say, wait here, that my son and I are going to go in sacrifice, and then we were going to come again. And so it was there on the smaller peak of Mount Moreh-Yah that then the servants of Abraham took the wood of the sacrifice, put it on the shoulders of Isaac, and Abraham said, "Son, follow me." And Isaac then said, "Well, Father, I have the wood of the sacrifice. The servants have put it on my shoulder. I'm carrying the wood of the sacrifice on my shoulder. Where's the lamb?" And the father Abraham said, "God will provide himself a lamb. Follow me." And Isaac, the son, followed the father up to the highest peak of Mount Moreh-Yah, as you see indicated on the left here. And there it is where Abraham built an altar of stone. Then he put the wood of the sacrifice on the altar of stone and bound his son to the wood of the sacrifice. Then Abraham took his knife, raised it up to strike it across Isaac's throat, and right then the angel of the Lord stopped him and said, "God knows that you will not withhold the life of your son." And God provided a ram which is caught in the thicket, a male lamb of the first year, and that was a substitute for the son at that time, the time that the first rehearsal was put in place at the city of Jerusalem. Now you can see, as you look down upon the city, exactly where these things took place. On the lower peak is where the Temple Mount was eventually built, and at the highest peak of Mount Moreh-Yah is where Abraham took Isaac, prepared an altar of stone, bound his son to the wood of the sacrifice. Many years later, they began building a wall around the city of Jerusalem. And the wall on the north side of the city is only about 12 to 15 feet tall. How do you defend a wall that tall? What they did is they quarried out all of the stone in front of that wall because Mount Moriah is excellent quarry material. They removed it and built the wall of the city of Jerusalem. And then we see that the masonry is only about 12 feet high at the highest peak, but yet you have the sheared away mountain, and it makes the wall effectively about 60 feet tall. And there, of course, you see the location of the temple in which it was built later. Now, in this particular shot, superimposed over this drawing is a picture out of an archaeological resource in the city of Jerusalem that shows that the wall, which is pictured there in brown, the wall of masonry is only about 12 feet high there. And then you see carved into the side, you see this is what is referred to as Solomon's quarries. Because that stone was so valuable, Solomon then chiseled into the side of Mount Moriah, and that is where the stone was taken out to build Solomon's temple many years later. Right there in front of Solomon's quarries in the old roadbed, this is the area that Josephus said at one time the Romans had over 2,000 Jewish men hanging on crosses along that wall there. They actually ran out of lumber in the city of Jerusalem and had men waiting in line up to a week for the next cross to become available because it took up to a week to be tortured to death on the Roman crosses. Now, they did not crucify men on hills far away. They crucified them right in the roadbed. In this area that was excavated down through there, numerous 2-foot deep sockets chiseled into the solid rock roadbed have been found in there, and I've held in my hands numerous 9-inch nails that were brought up from that site because of the thousands of execution of the Jews that had taken place there. This is what became known as the place of the skull, and that's where the executions were done. And when they sunk those crosses into those 2-foot deep sockets, then you were looking eye to eye, face to face with your brother, your father, your next door neighbor. And you just had to sit there in front of them and watch them day after day as the life bled out of them. Up to a week it took. A very torturous death. Here you can see the wall of Jerusalem. Now this one is about 20 feet high, but then you can see how Mount Moriah is sheared off, and then of course there's a lot of debris in that particular area. Now Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 of the Common Era. And when it was destroyed, the wall of Jerusalem was broken down, the temple was destroyed, and the wall all the way around was leveled. But many years later, Suleiman the Magnificent came back in, and he rebuilt the wall. And in the 1840s, you would walk out what is now called the Damascus Gate, right straight out onto the dirt roadbed, which was many, many feet of debris and fill at that particular time. But now when you walk out the Damascus Gate, you have to go up about 25 to 30 feet to get to the current roadbed upon which all the vehicular and pedestrian traffic now travels along that wall, the north wall of the city of Jerusalem. That's where the buildings are built up there. But as you're walking out that gate, you look down to the right, and there is the only gate in the city of Jerusalem which has been excavated down to its original foundations and the foundations at the time of Herod's temple. This was the gate that Yahshua of Nazareth walked out on his way over to the execution site. Most of the streets over in Jerusalem and what is called the Via Dolorosa is actually 20 to 30 feet above the actual level that it was at the time of the Messiah. And we see that basically what you're looking at now is 30 feet of debris, and then all the buildings built on the many times that Jerusalem has been destroyed during that period of time. But this one gate, as you walk across that threshold, you are walking across the very stones that the Messiah himself walked across on the way out to the execution site. Now, the top of the hill, as you see there on the left, that is now an Arab graveyard. That is currently the highest peak of Mount Moriah. And it was in this area, right along here, that Ron Wyatt, who had been down at the Red Sea crossing site, and they were doing the filming of the chariot parts in the strewn for a mile and a half on the bottom of the Red Sea, in which he became very badly sunburned. They had to stop their diving, and he went back to the city of Jerusalem and had to wait 2 more days until his airline ticket home. He was walking in the area where this red arrow indicates, And as he walked along this area with the gentleman from the Department of Antiquities, he said that he reached out with his left hand, and his left hand pointed at a pile of junk that had a dead cat on it, and with his mouth he said, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and in there is the Ark of the Covenant." He said as soon as he said that, he drew his hand back and realized this is, first of all, a ridiculous statement to make in front of a professional archaeologist, and that he had never even thought about looking for the Ark of the Covenant. But what the man said that was accompanying him was even more remarkable. He said, "That is wonderful. We'll take care of your permits, put you up with a place to stay, take care of your food and your laundry. When can you start?" He had no idea. He was due back at work as a nurse anesthetist back in America, and after 6 months he came back and he began digging in that area. It took years of excavation, but this is the area that has been excavated, and they got down to the original cross sites, and many of these things are available to see on video. In fact, I met recently with Jim Baker, who took a professional film crew down there with him before the demise of PTL. He took the film crew down with him to the crucifixion site, videoed all this area down there, and hopefully we'll be able to show you some of those things very soon. But this is the area of the crucifixions. Now, I have to discuss something and show you something that transpired in the spring of 1999. It was that year in which there was no rain in the land of Israel. In fact, the Sea of Galilee was down well below the red level, and there was no rain happening in the land of Israel this last year. But while there's no rain falling, up on the Temple Mount there are 4 cisterns which are carved out of solid stone. Those cisterns at one time had water diverted into them so that water could be drawn out for the use on the Temple Mount. But what happened is that during a time of drought and no rain, water began gushing into those 4 cisterns up on the Temple Mount. Why? What was going on? I received a call from one of the original founders of the Temple Treasures Institute asking me to come out to his home to discuss things concerning the Ark of the Covenant. When I got out there, we ended up staying up into the wee hours of the night, and he began laying some things out concerning the Ark, and he knew that I was involved in some of the things concerning the Ark, and that I was there teaching most of the time behind closed doors to people there concerning these things. And he was the one that said that it was several years ago that he was sent down into Ethiopia, because he, as one of the original founders of the Temple Treasures Institute, had to know, and the Temple Treasures Institute had to know, if the Ark of the Covenant was in Ethiopia. They felt it was very, very improbable that it could be there, but yet what they did is they got together a large sum of money, and he went down into Ethiopia and bribed his way into the compound or the church in which they say the Ark of the Covenant is. He paid a very high price in that bribe to get down into that church. As they then took him all the way down inside, they then showed him the Ark of the Covenant. And he said, "Where is it?" And they said, "Right there. If you're supposed to see it, you'll be able to see it. But if you're not supposed to see it, you won't be able to see it." As he was looking at nothing. And he said, "No, this is not going to work. I want my money back." And they said, "No, what you see is what you see." And he stood there and realized it just cost a very high price to find out that there was nothing there. But that's not really that surprising, because the whole legend of the Ark of the Covenant being in Ethiopia goes back to a legend that Solomon's son, by the Queen of Sheba, Queen of Ethiopia, who, Solomon's son being raised in Jerusalem, then made a copy of the Ark of the Covenant. And you have to remember that Solomon's son never saw the Ark of the Covenant. Only the high priest saw the Ark of the Covenant once a year, and he didn't see it without taking a fire pan full of smoking incense, laying it before the Ark of the Covenant so that that cloud would cover the cloud of glory so he wasn't blinded and wasn't killed. And when he came out, there is no record of the high priest ever making a dashboard model of it. But yet Solomon's son made a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. He got it all the way into the Holy of Holies, and then took the real Ark and got it all the way down into Ethiopia. Now the real miracle is he made such a good copy that the glory of the Lord remained over the fake Ark for nearly 500 years. So he actually made a copy of the Ark so good it fooled God. So if you buy that story, I've got a bridge for sale in Brooklyn that I can make you a real nice deal on. But yet, that is what is being promulgated out there. Tonight, I'm going to show you what has been found and the details of these things. Because as we were out in his home late that night, he said that the Arabs panicked when this water began flowing into these 4 cisterns. They had no idea what was going on, and this shot shows what I took the very next morning, got up early, went up on the Temple Mount, and right after the Muslim hours of prayer, then they set up an apparatus to lower down a big pump into each of these 4 cisterns, and all day long pumping the water out because they were afraid that it may be undermining the foundation of the Dome of the Rock. Now, what happened, as you see in the background, you see the pumps being set up, the tractor bringing the equipment up there early in the morning, and what Eduardo said is that not knowing what had happened, the Arabs knew that they had put a water line in on the Temple Mount several years ago, and they thought perhaps that water line had ruptured. Excavating in this area, the Temple Treasures Institute had men that got up there and took pictures of this water line that had gone in a straight line until the Arabs had run into these huge foundation stones and had to shift that water line over to go around these huge foundation stones. With those photographs and knowing already where the northern foundation of Solomon's temple was, they said at that time then they could accurately measure it, and they knew that the southern foundation of Solomon's temple had been uncovered, and that the ancient stone underneath the Dome of the Spirits, which you see, which is the Dome of the Spirits is where the red arrow is, that stone under there is in the middle of the Holy of Holies of Solomon's temple. And so it is that I got up there the next morning and began photographing. I went into that. He said that if you go into that Dome of the Spirits, that they will immediately throw you out. So what I did, first thing in the morning, I came up there and I stood right in the middle of that. Within a few moments, there was a very irate Arab that ran out and told me, "Get out of there, get out of there." And I looked around and said, "Who, me?" And I'm going to carry this on as long as possible. He came all the way around and refused to speak to me until I stepped out. And I said, "Well, why? What is this?" And he said, "You can read about it." And I thought he was going to give me a brochure or something. And I said, "Where?" "In books, now leave." So I did. I left in a big circle, came back, and began taking pictures. On the right-hand side, there you see the approximate area where that water line was in, and then underneath the Dome of the Spirits is that huge stone which is underneath the Dome of the Spirits. It is in a direct line with the Mercy Gate. The Golden Gate, the Mercy Gate, right down the middle, which again shows the location concerning Solomon's temple. Now, as we look at the same thing, we have the dome, and then we have that straight line that goes right straight out, the Eastern Gate or the Mercy Gate. Of course, the Mercy Gate has been all blocked up, and the Arabs have put a graveyard there to keep the Messiah from coming through the gate. You're like, that will work. But Herod's temple and the Dome of the Rock are south of the Kotel arches. This is the Wailing Wall, or the Kotel, the wall, and you see that dark line above the red line that we put there from the oils on our foreheads and hands touching the wall there, and you see where the seam of the wall is on that gold line, and to the south is the location of the Dome of the Rock. That is where Herod's temple was built. But this is showing the location of Solomon's temple, which is north of the Kotel arches and north of the Dome of the Rock. And you see that everything below that red line is now under about 30 to 40 feet of debris. The Temple of Solomon, why this is so important is because this is the location where the Ark of the Covenant resided. Solomon built the temple to put the Ark of the Covenant in, and you're going to see some things tonight that we've been waiting 3,000 years to understand.
Michael Rood will return with some closing thoughts in just a moment.
The Ark of the Covenant is indisputably the most holy object on planet Earth. We have been warned throughout the pages of the Hebrew Scriptures that the Ark of the Covenant is not to be trifled with in any manner. Jeremiah states that the Ark of the Covenant will no longer come to mind at the time when the Messiah is reigning in Jerusalem. But until that day, the Ark of the Covenant will continue to hold great prophetic significance for the last days. What you learn in upcoming episodes of this program will become your responsibility to handle with respect. What you will soon see and hear will change your life forever. We invite you to join us again next time for Episode 9 in the 26-part series on the prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, the great secret of Solomon's Temple, and the hiding of the Ark of the Covenant. This is Michael Rood from Jerusalem, bidding you shalom, peace, and I'll see you when the smoke clears.